checked her ID like it was fake, questioned her presence like she didn't belong, and even called security, all before realizing they were about to deny service to the one woman who could shut the entire place down with a single phone call. The thought had been lingering in her mind for months. At first, it was just a quiet whisper, easy to ignore. But the more she sat with it, the louder it got. The more it ate at her. Danielle Grayson wasn't just any executive. She built Grayson Trust from scratch. Her bank. Her vision. Her name on every contract. She wasn't just some CEO with a view from a glass office. She was hands-on, boots on the ground, committed to building a bank that stood for fairness and accessibility. But lately, she wasn't so sure. There had been murmurs, small, offhand comments from people she trusted. Friends, clients, employees hinting at something off. Certain customers feeling unwelcome. Treated differently. Nothing big enough to make headlines, but enough to make her uneasy. And unease doesn't sit well with a woman like Danielle. Yes, the bank had policies, anti-discrimination, fair treatment, stellar customer service. But policies are just ink on paper. Real change? That lives in action. So today, she wasn't walking in as a CEO. No power suit, no entourage. Just a woman in jeans, a cardigan, and sneakers, just another face in the lobby. She pulled into the parking lot of a Grayson Trust branch in Indianapolis, Indiana, a location she had personally approved. She had cut the ribbon here just 3 years ago, shaking hands, giving speeches about trust and integrity. Now, she was walking through those same doors as a stranger. The lobby smelled like fresh paper and overpowered air freshener. A few customers waited in line, a couple sat quietly in the lounge, and one teller off to the side was focused on her cash drawer. Danielle stepped up to the counter. The teller, a young woman, probably mid-20s, pale skin, dark hair and a tight ponytail, glanced up briefly. No hello. No smile. Just a glance, and then back to her screen. Danielle cleared her throat. "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal." No eye contact. No acknowledgement. The teller silently slid over a clipboard. Standard form. Name, account number, withdrawal amount. Danielle calmly filled it out. $5,000, not a huge sum, but enough to require ID verification. She handed the clipboard back. That's when everything changed. The teller's eyes scanned the form, then landed on Danielle's ID. Her brows furrowed. Lips tightened. Something shifted in the air, small, but sharp. Danielle noticed it instantly. A pause. A hesitation. A silent calculation behind the teller's eyes. And in that moment, Danielle knew this wasn't about the money. It wasn't about bank policy. It was about perception. About assumptions. The teller stared at her ID, fingers hovering over the keyboard, then slowly set the card down. I'll be right back." Danielle watched her disappear through the manager's office door. 5 minutes passed. She leaned on the counter, tapping her nails on the marble. She had expected to be treated like an ordinary customer. But this was something else. And she wasn't going anywhere. She glanced around. A man in a rumpled suit 2 spots behind her had been greeted immediately when he arrived. An older woman in a floral dress was chatting comfortably with another teller across the room. No scrutiny. No tension. No waiting. Danielle turned back to the counter, jaw clenched. She had been standing there for nearly 5 minutes. No explanation. No courtesy. Just silence. If this were about protocol, the teller would have said something. Anything. But she hadn't. She just walked away. Finally, the door opened. The teller returned, not alone this time. Behind her walked a middle-aged man, stocky build, bald, wearing rimless glasses. His name tag said Todd Larson, branch manager. His face wore a polite smile. But it was too practiced. Too careful. And Danielle Grayson was ready. He wasn't walking over like someone coming to help, he was analyzing. Calculating. Danielle recognized that look. She'd seen it in boardrooms and negotiations, but never aimed at her. Todd stopped at the counter, offering a tight, rehearsed smile. "Afternoon, ma'am. I understand you're here to make a withdrawal?" Danielle gave a single nod. "That's right, $5,000. My account. My ID." Todd glanced at the teller, then back at Danielle. "Mind if I take a quick look at your identification?" She let out a slow breath, steadying her voice. "I already gave it to her." He didn't acknowledge the comment. Just picked up the ID, held it up to the light, studying it longer than necessary. Then he looked her in the eyes. "Miss Grayson, is this your first time banking with us?" Her stomach dropped. The phrasing was polite, but the subtext was clear. "Do you belong here?" Her tone sharpened. "I've banked here since this branch opened." Todd gave a slow, exaggerated nod like he was trying to digest the information. "And you said you're withdrawing $5,000? Danielle felt her patience thinning. "That's what I wrote down." The lobby had grown quieter, not silent, but heavy. A few customers were beginning to look over, sensing the shift. Todd turned her ID in his hand again. Still not looking at her. "And what do you do for work, Miss Grayson?" She let out a short, disbelieving laugh, not amused, just stunned. There it was. The mask of professionalism slipping just enough to reveal what was really going on. She tilted her head slightly, keeping her tone even. "Finance." Todd's smile was stiff. "Oh? What kind?" Danielle let the silence hang for just a second too long. Then, banking. That made him pause, but only for a heartbeat. Then he pushed forward. "I see. And this is a personal account, correct? Not a business one?" She folded her arms. "That's what it says on the form." Another glance at the teller. Another beat of hesitation. And then, he made his call. Todd gently placed the ID back on the counter. "Unfortunately, we won't be able to process this withdrawal at this time." Danielle blinked. Did she hear that right? "Excuse me?" Todd's expression was calm. Too calm. "We're unable to verify the transaction." Her heart rate picked up. "You have my ID. You have my account number. What exactly is there to verify?" He clasped his hands like he was delivering a sermon. "It's just a precaution. We take security very seriously." Security. The word people use when they don't want to say what they really mean. Danielle could feel it now. This wasn't about banking policy. It was about her. About who they thought she was. But she wasn't leaving. Not like this. She leaned forward, eyes locked on him. "Todd," she said, steady but firm, "what exactly needs to be verified?" He kept his hand still, his tone rehearsed. "Large cash withdrawals require additional steps. We just need to confirm a few details." She raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" There was a hesitation. A flicker of something behind his eyes. "Just some basic account verification. For example, can you tell me the amount of your last deposit?" Danielle stared at him. That wasn't standard procedure. Not for a withdrawal. Not with a valid ID. Not with a customer standing right in front of you. She could feel the moment pressing in, the challenge behind the question. Like he was daring her to prove she had access to her own money. "I don't have that number memorized," she said flatly. "But if you pull up my account, like you would for anyone else, you'll see it." Todd gave her a thin smile. "Of course. But in the interest of security, we need to confirm certain details first." Her jaw tightened. "I just gave you my ID. I understand. But you'd be surprised how often fraudulent IDs come through." Fraudulent. She took a breath through her nose, controlled but sharp. I'm not withdrawing millions. It's $5,000. A fraction of what's in that account. I followed protocol. So let me ask again, what's the real issue here? Todd's face didn't change. We're just doing our due diligence, Miss Grayson. Her voice dropped a register, now low and firm. Todd, she said slowly, if I were a man in a tailored suit, would you be asking me these same questions? And that's when it happened. A flicker. Barely noticeable. But it was there. A slight shift in his stance. A tightening around the eyes. And just like that, Danielle knew. This wasn't about a withdrawal. This was a moment of reckoning. His professional mask slipped back into place like it had never left. This isn't about appearance, Todd said smoothly. It's about policy. Danielle let out a dry, humorless laugh. Is that right? Todd tilted his head slightly, like he was choosing his next words with care. Would you like to try a different form of verification? He offered. Maybe a utility bill? A second piece of ID? A utility bill? Danielle blinked, letting the absurdity sink in. You want me to provide a second form of identification for my own bank account where you're currently holding my money? Todd didn't even flinch. Danielle tapped her nails against the marble counter, steady and deliberate. All right, let's do this another way, she said. Pull up my account. Todd hesitated. You've got my name, she continued. You've got my ID. If you check my file, you'll see I've been banking here since day one. You'll see I helped open this branch. You'll probably even find my signature on some of your training manuals. Still nothing. No apology. No movement. Danielle leaned in, voice low but direct. You might want to check that before you dig this hole any deeper. Todd's jaw tightened. The teller, who'd been watching in silence, suddenly shifted, uncomfortable. Danielle wondered, just for a moment, if he was about to back down. Maybe apologize. Maybe finally handle this like a professional. But instead, Todd exhaled, like he'd made up his mind. I'm sorry, Miss Grayson, he said, with manufactured calm. Without additional verification, we can't process this withdrawal today. Heat surged through her chest, not from embarrassment. From fury. She could feel the glances now. People in the lobby turning just slightly. Not openly watching, but aware. The tension was undeniable. And Todd? His tone was still polite. Still composed. But Danielle knew better. This wasn't about security. He had already decided she didn't belong, and nothing she said was going to change that. But that was his mistake. Because if he had just processed the transaction, this would have been over. Now she was about to make sure he remembered this moment for the rest of his career. She opened her mouth to speak, but then Todd did something that made her stop cold. He reached beneath the counter and pressed a button. Danielle's breath caught. A silent alarm. Moments later, a security guard emerged from the back. Broad shoulders. Uniform crisp. One hand resting near his belt. His expression gave nothing away. But Danielle knew exactly what this looked like. This wasn't policy. This was escalation. This was public humiliation disguised as protocol. She drew in a slow, steady breath. She had dealt with men like Todd before, the ones who wore professionalism like armor, but used it like a weapon. The ones who smiled while quietly reminding you of your place. But she wasn't shrinking back. She lifted her chin slightly, eyes locked on his. You're really doing this? Todd's voice stayed neutral. We just want to ensure a smooth experience for all our customers. Smooth. As if she was the problem. The guard stepped forward. His voice calm, almost gentle. Is there a problem here? Danielle turned to him, cool and composed. That depends, she said. Are you here to help me access my money, or just escort me out? The guard hesitated, uncertain, glancing toward Todd. Todd gave a small nod. Danielle let out a short, disbelieving laugh and shook her head. "Wow," she said under her breath. "So this is how it goes." Todd sighed, as if he was the one being inconvenienced. "Miss Grayson, if you'd like to return with additional documentation, we'd be happy to assist." Danielle cut him off. "You know what's funny, Todd," she said, voice sharp now. "I watched you help that man 10 minutes ago. No ID check. No questions. No security. Just a smile and a transaction." Todd's face stiffened. Danielle stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough. "So I'm wondering, what's different about me?" Silence. The teller looked down. The guard shifted on his feet, less firm now. But Todd stood still. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Miss Grayson," he said. "But our policies are in place for a reason." Danielle held his gaze. Then, without a word, she reached into her bag. Todd flinched. The guard's hand moved, subtle but tense. Danielle didn't even blink. She pulled out her phone, unlocked it, pressed record. A few heads in the lobby turned. They knew something was happening now. Todd's body stiffened. "I just want to make sure I get this on record," Danielle said, calm and clear. "You're refusing to let me access my own account, despite having a valid government-issued ID, while other customers walk through without being questioned. Is that correct?" Todd's jaw clenched. And just like that, the story had changed. Danielle angled her phone slightly, locking the camera on the guard. "And you," she said calmly, "were called over for what reason exactly?" The guard glanced at Todd, clearly unsure how to respond. Danielle didn't move. Didn't blink. She gave them nothing, no space to redirect, no room to regain control. The silence in the bank was thick now, the kind of silence that holds its breath. And then, Todd made one final mistake. He reached out, not to take her phone, not to apologize, but to snatch her ID off the counter. Like he still needed the last word. Like he still thought he had the authority to end this on his terms. But that was it. That was the moment Danielle smiled. Because Todd had no idea who he was dealing with. And in about 10 seconds, he was going to wish he'd done things differently. She let it sit there, letting him stew in the mistake. Letting him believe, for just a breath longer, that he was still in charge. Then she tilted her phone again, making sure it caught his face, the guard, the weight in the room. And with absolute composure, she said, "Todd, let me properly introduce myself." His expression cracked, just slightly. A twitch of uncertainty around the eyes. Danielle reached out, took her ID back from his hand with deliberate calm, and flipped it around, tapping her finger on the name. "You see this? This isn't just some customer's ID." She paused, let the silence stretch, then said, "You're looking at the founder and CEO of Grayson Trust." Everything stopped. The security guard shifted like someone had just yanked the ground from under him. The teller's face turned ghost white. Even the customers who had been pretending not to listen were suddenly frozen, alert, wide-eyed. Todd, finally, lost his grip. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Danielle stepped back, sliding her ID into her bag. "I built this bank," she said quietly. "From nothing. I signed the documents that approved this branch. I signed your hiring budget, Todd." His hands curled into fists. The corporate mask was gone. What remained was raw panic. She gave him a slow, pointed smile. "And today? I walked in like anyone else. Just to see what would happen." She tilted her head. "You know what happened, Todd?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. "I was refused service. Lied to. Humiliated. Treated like I didn't belong." Todd's throat moved as he tried to swallow. "Miss Grayson." She raised a hand. "No. You had your turn. Now you listen. She turned slightly, projecting just loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. If I walked in here in a tailored suit, if I were a man, if I looked like the CEO you expect, none of this would have happened. Todd's eyes darted to the guard like he was hoping for an escape. But the guard said nothing. The teller didn't look up. The entire room had turned on its axis. Danielle lifted her phone again. "Todd, let me ask you something," she said flatly. "Should I send this footage to corporate? Or do you want me to handle this right here, right now?" Todd visibly paled. His mouth opened and closed twice before the words stumbled out. "Miss Grayson, I sincerely apologize. This was just a misunderstanding." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding?" He nodded frantically. "Yes, absolutely. I can process that withdrawal immediately." But Danielle shook her head, letting out a soft, cold laugh. "Oh, Todd." She looked at him the way a queen might look at a knight who dropped his sword. "You and I both know it's too late for that." The color drained from his face. He knew. He knew exactly how bad this was going to get. His once practiced poise had completely crumbled. His hands were gripping the counter like he needed it to stay upright. The security guard, unsure if he was supposed to stay or leave, shifted awkwardly beside him. Danielle tapped her nails gently against the marble. "Let me make sure I've got this right," she said, cool and methodical. "Just a few minutes ago, my ID wasn't enough. My name wasn't enough. My account history, still not enough." She let the pause settle. "But now that you know who I am, suddenly none of that matters anymore." Todd swallowed hard. "Miss Grayson, I deeply regret how this unfolded. I promise you, this wasn't intentional." Danielle laughed, low and sharp. "Not intentional?" She took a step forward. "Do you think I'm stupid?" His eyes widened, but he said nothing. "You knew exactly what you were doing," she continued, voice steady as a blade. "You looked at me and decided, before I even opened my mouth, that I didn't belong. And you did everything you could to make sure I felt it." Todd shook his head desperately. "No, Miss Grayson, I assure you." But Danielle lifted her hand once again. "No," she said, and this time her voice hit like stone. "I don't want to hear another rehearsed apology," Danielle said, her voice cool but cutting. "Let's be honest, you're not sorry for what you did. You're just sorry you got caught." Todd's jaw locked, but he said nothing. Around them, the silence in the bank had shifted. No one was pretending anymore. Every customer in that lobby had stopped mid-motion, every conversation had died out. The weight of the moment was undeniable. Thick. Charged. The teller, the one who had set this entire mess into motion, stood stiff behind her station, eyes glued to the register, refusing to look up. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Danielle turned to the security guard. "You were called over to escort me out," she said, her tone level. The guard hesitated for a second, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Yes, ma'am. That was my understanding." She nodded once, taking it in. "And now that you know who I am, are you still under that impression?" The guard shifted, visibly uncomfortable. He glanced at Todd, then back at Danielle. "No, ma'am," he said. "I was just following instructions." Danielle studied him for a long moment. She'd seen this play out before, how people in power squirm when their actions are suddenly under a microscope. She knew exactly what Todd would do next, try to pass the blame, frame this as a misunderstanding, act like this was all just one big overreaction. But she wasn't letting it go. Not today. She reached into her bag, pulled out a crisp business card, and slid it across the counter toward him. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, each word deliberate. "You're going to call my office. You're going to schedule a meeting with corporate. And you're going to explain, in detail, what happened here today." Todd's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the card. Oh, of course, Miss Grayson. Absolutely. Danielle turned to the security guard. I appreciate you stepping in when called, she said evenly. But I'd strongly recommend that next time, you evaluate whether a situation actually calls for your presence. If a customer isn't being disruptive, intimidation shouldn't be the first move. The guard gave a respectful nod. Understood, ma'am. Then Danielle turned to the teller, who still hadn't looked up. You. The young woman flinched. Danielle leaned slightly forward across the counter, her voice calm but unshakably firm. You saw my ID. You had my account information. And you still decided I wasn't worth listening to. The teller finally looked up. Eyes wide. I was just following protocol, ma'am. Danielle raised an eyebrow. Then maybe you should ask yourself why that protocol only seems to apply to people like me. The teller swallowed hard and looked away. Danielle scanned the room one last time. Every customer was watching. Every employee had heard. This wasn't about a $5,000 withdrawal anymore. This was something much bigger. She straightened her posture. She had made her point, but she wasn't finished. Because what just happened? That wasn't going to be swept under a rug. Danielle turned, her heels clicking sharply against the polished tile as she made her way toward the exit. The silence in the branch was suffocating. No one moved. No one dared speak. Todd stood frozen, her business card still clutched in his hand like it was burning a hole in his palm. The teller looked ready to burst into tears. The guard, once firm and confident, now shifted nervously like he wasn't sure what to do next. At the door, Danielle paused. She slowly turned back around. Just one more thing, she said. Because she wasn't the kind of leader who let something like this slide. She had spent years building Grayson Trust from the ground up, brick by brick, not just to be another bank, but to be different. A place where people felt safe, respected, valued. But today reminded her of a painful truth. Policies don't matter if the people enforcing them don't believe in them. She took a slow breath and scanned the room. And in a voice that was steady, clear, and impossible to ignore, she said, "This is the last time something like this happens in my bank." The weight of her words hit the room like a wave. Todd flinched. The teller shifted in place. The security guard looked down. Danielle continued, "I will not stand by while customers are treated differently because of assumptions, bias, or ignorance." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "Things are going to change," she said simply. "Real change. Because if this can happen to me, the CEO, then I can only imagine what's happening to the people who don't have the power to speak up." No one dared interrupt. The lobby remained silent. Todd's throat bobbed as he tried to swallow. "Miss Grayson, I assure you." She held up a hand, stopping him cold. "Don't assure me," she said. "Show me." Then, without breaking eye contact, she glanced at her phone. The recording was still running. She stopped it, slipped it into her bag. "Corporate will be in touch," she said flatly. "And Todd?" He straightened, tense. "You might want to start looking for a new job." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, walked out, and the doors closed behind her. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, Danielle had called an emergency meeting with her executive team. Every single branch manager was pulled in. Every customer service policy was reviewed, rewritten. And Todd? He was gone. But that was only the beginning. Danielle launched mandatory bias training across every branch. She introduced a new accountability framework and created a system where customers could report discrimination, no matter how subtle, with guaranteed follow-up. And slowly, things began to shift. Employees became more aware, more thoughtful. Customers who had been overlooked or dismissed before started to feel the difference. And Danielle? She never forgot that day, because it proved what she had always believed. Real change doesn't come from mission statements. It doesn't come from well-written policies or public promises. It comes when someone refuses to accept the way things are. And on that day, that someone was her. So if you've ever been in a situation like this, or you know someone who has, don't stay silent. Speak up. Call it out. Demand better. Because things only get better when we refuse to settle for less.